Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How are you doing? I didn't do this yesterday, but good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, November 7th, 2018. Time for another episode of Kagro in the Morning. It is post-election. We will be bringing you reports from, of course, Greg Dworkin and I think Joan McCarter, although she could be asleep at this point. I should be asleep at this point. You and I should both be asleep at this point. I may fall asleep during the show. Did you stay up late? Were you waiting for returns from California? Bad idea, because, of course, they may take weeks to finalize. But if you did stay up, you probably caught wind, if you really stayed up all the way through the night, caught wind of the very late-breaking news about various congressional seats flipping there. It looks like one of the latest is Dana Rohrabacher on his way out the door, perhaps. So fingers crossed that result holds up. I haven't had time to actually check in on the numbers and the state of play in every single race. So hopefully between Joan and Greg and the rest of you out there who are our eyes and ears elsewhere on the ground and on the internets can keep us up to date and we can get all this done right. If I do fall asleep during the show, by the way, all you're going to have to do is read Twitter. Today's show should probably be a collection of about 1 million tweets that I put aside just to try to catch up on all the news, the various ways of looking at and or spinning what happened yesterday, the various races of importance, the various firsts of importance. Lots going on here. And as I remind you, first thing in the morning in our Daily Coast Radio is live post over at Daily Coast. Last night a big turnaround. Of course, control of the House of Representatives falling to Democrats for the first time in a few years. It's been quite a while. And as I put it in the tweet last night and the post this morning, if you count as Atlantic City casinos, this is the fourth time that Donald Trump has lost the House. So, you know, it's something that happens to him with some fair frequency. It is a big deal, of course, and we'll catch up on everything that we can. Another side project I'm working on, furiously Googling to see how many cases this may be true, in which this may be true. But I can tell you this, for some of the main outposts that Donald Trump will be visiting to, to get over the election results, though he believes, he maintains, his spin is it was a big success for him last night. The big news from my perspective, of course, in our local races, it all came out well. That comes from my secret plot to increase the voting power of my household by 50% by back in early 2000. My wife and I hatched a plan to create a new voter in our household, and it didn't really even involve any sort of voter fraud at all. It was a long-term plan, but it finally did come to fruition. And with our additional 50% voting power, we were able to see Jennifer Wexton defeat Barbara Comstock locally. Tim Kaine never in any serious trouble in his challenge from Corey Stewart, but he remains in the Senate as well. So a good job, and what a win, too. By the way, I think by most accounts it was the first congressional race called by the networks last night. One, because it's East Coast. Two, because Virginia polls close at 7 p.m. as opposed to 8 p.m., so that gives us a leg up in starting to count. And third, because she absolutely crushed Barbara Comstock, and everybody knew it was going to happen, so it was an easy call. I should have entered one of those contests where you were supposed to pick a lock of an election for the night. But of course, if you're an idiot enough to pick your own district as the lock, you end up jinxing it, and then you have to live under the tyranny of a Republican representative for 2 years, and that would suck. So I stayed clear of most of those things. The other news about that election, Trump National Golf Course in Sterling, Virginia, now falls under Democratic control. That's right here in my district as well. I'm so lucky. And Donald Trump will have to visit a blue district to get his Virginia golfing fix in. In the midsummer, when he turns to Bedminster, New Jersey, that falls in New Jersey's 7th congressional district. Now also, I believe, represented by a Democrat. I guess he can always retreat to Mar-a-Lago. The course in Jupiter, Florida, remains, yes, somewhat less surprisingly, in Republican hands. So that's the new quest, is to map out his golf courses and to win every single one of those districts so that he can't go golfing anymore. I don't think we actually have control over that, but it does mean that he'll face more and more robust protest when he does visit. And don't forget, the Virginia golf course is the one where he was met with the one-fingered salute from a local woman who, by the way, now getting increasingly involved in politics and perhaps ready to jump in with both feet herself. Julie Briskman, you will have seen her photo nationally, giving the salute from her bicycle as she passed the presidential motorcade. So it means something. And I don't know that it means a great deal. Certainly there are more things that mean more than just that. Greg has a list of those. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Good morning. Well, we're doing just fine.
Okay, very good. You should be.
Ned Lamont will be the next governor.
Ah, that's another thing. Yes.
And Joe Lieberman, who offered to do the transition team for the Republican Bob Stefanowski, is out of a job yet again in Connecticut.
And that does tend to happen to
I told you it'd be worth about 2 points. That's about what Lamont is going to win by.
Yeah, okay.
Lamont didn't clinch the governorship, and I don't even know if it's official yet because New Haven hasn't come in. That'll be a blue area.
Okay.
But it wasn't until like 5 o'clock in the morning that Lamont took the lead.
Oh. Well, okay, you had to wait. You had to stay up to get or get up.
No, I went to bed and then I got up and saw it. When I went to bed, Stefanowski was leading, and when I got up, Lamont was leading. So that was really very nice.
Well, all right.
And our friend Monty Frank, friend of the show, who was running as lieutenant governor on an independent ticket with Oz Griebel, didn't do very well, but he wasn't a spoiler, so everybody's happy about that.
That is okay. That's the best outcome you can get then.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I could just appoint him lieutenant governor, but that's
right.
Not the way it works.
He'd be a great one. But all politics is local. So let's look at Virginia, one of my favorite states, with some of my favorite people.
Mm-hmm.
Virginia 10 was one of the first with Jennifer Wexton to beat Barbara Comstock, the Democrat winning. But I don't know how many troops Jennifer Wexton has, so I don't know if she really has control over that golf course.
Yeah. Well, I'm here, so I could help.
This is true, and very grateful for your 50% increase there.
Hey,
well planned.
I got another one in the works.
Oh,
so
what?
Well, it won't take 18 years. It's just another 5. 5 until he hatches.
Okay, not too bad. Not too bad.
4.5, really. Okay. So it'll be. We have off-year elections here in Virginia, so 2023.
Right. So not too bad. The two that I was looking at especially and was really, really, really happy about in Virginia, two, for example.
Yes.
Elaine Luria beats Scott Taylor.
All right. Yeah, Virginia had some late-breaking stories, too.
So that was a bit of a surprise, but very pleased about that. And then Virginia 7, Abigail Spanberger, beats the Brat. And don't forget that's Eric Cantor's old district. But between Corey Stewart losing, Dave Bratt losing, and Scott Taylor losing, those are NRA targeted candidates who all lost.
Yes.
In your state. So we're really, really, really happy about that.
I'm pretty pleased. We were, I was disappointed to see that the 5th district didn't go that way too, but, the old can't win them all story.
Bigfoot porn apparently is much more important than NRA backing.
Very popular.
So who knew?
Yeah, and he fits right in too. So he comes
with
a
a
national
big
reputation.
I did want to mention Connecticut, of course. Johanna Hayes, first black female candidate to Congress from Connecticut. And
a lot of big firsts.
I wanted to mention Virginia because I think they're both important.
I agree.
And another one that you had brought up is Dana Rohrabacher and Harley Rhoda with 100% of the vote in, it says here.
Well, all right then.
91,750 for Rhoda, and Rohrabacher gets only 89,068. So 2,682 vote for the Democrat lead. Oh. And looks like Rohrabacher's going to lose.
I guess so, 100%. And although you never know what that actually means, but okay.
Well, they got to count the provisionals and they got to count the absentees maybe. And so some of these are going to take a while. But for the time being, that's also good. There are individual stories. And individual stories, for example, include Georgia 6.
Yes, okay.
Georgia 6 is the John Ossoff district without Ossoff and with 100% of the vote in. Again, the same thing. Provisional, certainly in Georgia, because they screwed up their counting so badly because Brian Kemp didn't recuse himself, and he's a jerk as Secretary of State, who also may well be the next governor. But Lucy McBath, the Democrat, has a 50.3% vote tally, and Karen Handel is losing at 49.7 with 100% of the vote in, and that's 2,145 votes. There's a lot of 2,000 vote differences in a lot of these states. We said the other day, a wave is when you win most of the toss-ups.
Yeah.
You don't have to win all by like big numbers. Was this a wave? Well, just about, but almost, but not quite, but sort of. And we'll talk about that. That's a more big picture thing.
Okay.
But, for example, we lost seats in the Senate.
Yes.
Looks like John Tester's going to hold out and win. But it looks like we're going to lose about 3 seats, and we're going to flip more than that because we win with Jackie Rosen. John Ralston was totally right about what he was saying about what was going to happen. But at the same time, we're going to lose North Dakota. We're going to lose Indiana. We're going to lose Missouri. And it looks like we're going to lose Florida. And Florida, of course, is the big disappointment of the night. But we're going to pick up Nevada with Jackie Rosen. And it looks like we're probably going to lose Arizona, but that's not clear. There's still like a 15,000 vote difference, and we still have to wait for absentees and provisionals there as well. So not a good night for the Senate, but a pretty good night. We're going to pick up as many as 35 seats in the House. And that's really not bad. And you know what? Both of those are well within what the polls and the projections said. And as far as the doesn't count but of interest popular vote, looks like just like the generic ballot said, the Democrats were probably going to win about 7.5% ahead of the Republicans for the popular vote for the House. It doesn't count for everything. And at the same time, it looks like they're going to win about 57% of the Senate vote, and of course lose seats.
Yes.
Because
right, Senate works so well.
You know, but I say all those things
you do.
Because when you feel like you didn't win enough or didn't win as much as you thought, you actually did better than you thought.
There is a lot to take away from this one, and I suppose some people could consider it spin, but boy, there's a lot of positive stories to take away.
Yeah, we won the popular vote in both the Senate and the House. We won 7 governorships. We won the House back. We get to do
that's a big deal.
Subpoenas. We get to do oversight. We're going to lose ground in the Senate. That's important for judgeships, of course. But Washington is totally different now because Democrats now have an official voice.
Yeah.
And there's just no way to downplay that. That is a win for Democrats. It's not as big a win as we wanted, and Florida really hurts, but it's a win. And let me give you another example.
All right.
Let's look at Iowa.
Let's. Yes.
Let's read you some results from Iowa just to give you an idea of how this played. So the Republicans won the governorship. Excuse me. Yeah. Iowa 1 is a Democrat. Mm-hmm. Iowa 2 is a Democrat.
Yes.
Iowa 3 is a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
And Iowa 4 is Steve King, the Nazi, who won. And we're out of districts already. The legislature stays under GOP control. The auditor is a Democrat. The agriculture secretary is a Republican. The secretary of state's a Republican. The attorney general is a Democrat, and the treasurer is a Democrat.
Okay, that's Iowa.
A lot of mixed split ticket stuff there, split ticket voting.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives you an idea about how the whole election went, pretty much. You know, a little bit here, a little bit there. People voted for balance. They didn't vote for change as much as we wanted. But we picked up stuff. We picked up a lot of stuff that turns out to be important. And looking at some of the ones that I really liked, of course, Beto came very close in Texas but didn't win. But wound up kicking out Pete Sessions and John Culberson because he brought in enough votes to do that.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
So they also refilled the bench a little bit and got some local stuff. I think Harris County was like a total Democratic win.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of good stuff in there under the hood if you just step back and look. And governors, my two favorite governor losses, my horrible ones, of course, were Stacey Abrams, who hasn't quite lost yet because it may be a runoff.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
And, of course, Andrew Gillum. But Chris Kobach lost, and Scott Walker lost.
Yeah, and Chris Kobach lost on the day that they reversed the ban on felon voting in Florida. That election comes out differently next time.
Yeah, on 1.4 million more votes. I mean, that's a big deal. And if Georgia can actually fix some of their voting issues without Kemp being Secretary of State, that would not be a bad thing either. Yes. So, again, mixed picture. We won a seat in Staten Island. That never happens. Dan Donovan lost.
Oh.
We won Mark Sanford's old district in South Carolina. We won a seat in the middle of Oklahoma for no reason that I can figure.
It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah. And now Elijah Cummings and Adam Schiff and Richard Neal in Ways and Means are going to be in a position, as I wrote in the Pundit Roundup, to act as a check on Trump. And that makes an enormous difference. And already Richard Neal announced yesterday that as soon as he's chair of Ways and Means, he's asking for Trump's tax returns.
That's something you can do.
So, again, all of that is of interest. Now, we have individual races and individual stories. We got plenty of those. But I also wanted to give you this one. And this is kind of cool.
Okay.
This is Allie Maynard taking a look at some of the people that Trump endorsed.
Okay.
So if you think Trump just ran the table yesterday because he went out and he won all of his Senate seats, he didn't, of course, starting with John Tester, who looks like he's going to hang on. Trump has endorsed 11 Republicans running for governor, 31 House candidates, and 13 Senate candidates. And Allie Maynard says, I've screenshot every one of them and I'll let him know which one he loses.
Oh.
So let me just run this down real quick.
Project.
Trump-back candidate Jim Renacci has lost to Sherrod Brown in Ohio. Trump-back candidate Leah Vukmir has lost to Tammy Baldwin, the only out lesbian in the U.S. Senate. Womp womp. Trump-backed candidate Bob Hugin has lost to Bob Menendez. They did vote for the crook. It was important. Trump-backed candidate Keith Rothfuss has lost to Connor Lamb. Democrats flipped the district blue. Trump called that a must-win. Trump-backed candidate Patrick Morrissey lost to Joe Manchin in the West Virginia Senate race. And that rally speech in West Virginia was ineffective. Trump-backed candidate Kevin Yoder lost to Native American and openly gay attorney Sharice Davids in Kansas's 3rd district. Kansas turned more blue than Florida. Go figure. Trump-backed candidate and disgraced vice chairman of the bogus Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity, Chris Kobach, has lost to Laura Kelly in the race for Kansas governor.
Excellent.
Trump-backed candidate Dan Donovan has lost to Max Rose in New York's 11th congressional district. That would be Staten Island. Another pickup for House Democrats. We expected Max Rose, the Democrat, to win the Brooklyn part of it.
Yeah.
But the much larger Staten Island part of it, he won that too. That was pretty surprising.
Okay.
Trump-backed candidate Eric Paulson has lost his Minnesota 3 seat to Dean Phillips, despite Trump's strong endorsement. Trump-backed candidate Randy Hultgren, this is a big one, has lost his seat in Illinois 14 to Lauren Underwood.
All right.
You know, in fact, there's like 100 women in the House now.
Yeah, I think I saw the number was 114, maybe.
If they're going to have sexual harassment rules changed.
Well, yes. I would think some things will change, including the much mentioned fact that our winner in, or somewhat of a surprise though, our winner in Kansas, is it Sharice? Yeah, Sharice Davids there is an MMA fighter.
Yeah.
So I think that would only help things. Oh, and an attorney, yes.
And an attorney. Trump-backed candidate, well, you know, Antonio Delgado up in New York 19. He's a big city rapper, but, you know, he also happens to be a Rhodes Scholar.
Yes, right. People have these dual roles, you know.
He won. Yeah. He beat John Faso, the fascist, the racist. You know, it looks like Claudia Tenney's going to lose in New York State as well. Very, very Trumpy person. So, again, a lot of good individual results. Yes. Let's see if Allie gets to those. John James doesn't have the stamina to beat U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow in Michigan. Trump-backed candidate Rod Blum has lost to 29-year-old Abby Finkenauer in Iowa's 1st congressional district.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Finkenauer would have been the youngest person in Congress, but Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was even younger.
Yeah, so they'll hang out, maybe. I don't know.
Instagram. Trump-backed candidate John Cox loses heavily to Gavin Newsom for California governorship. Trump-backed candidate Dave Bratt loses to Abigail Spanberger in Virginia 7. Yay! Trump-backed candidate John Fassa loses big to Antonio Delgado in New York's 19th congressional district. Trump implied Delgado was a pro-Iranian terrorist because he's black. Sure. Actually, he's not a pro-Iranian terrorist. He's a congressman.
That's weird. That's an interesting conclusion to draw.
Yeah.
What?
Trump-backed Claudia Tenney is projected to lose New York's 22nd. Yesterday, Trump tweeted he needed Claudia. Trump-backed 4 Republicans in Minnesota who were all weak against Democrats. And I guess Trump has a pattern of wasting time on losers. She said, you get the idea. Yeah. There's a lot of people that he backed that lost. So the whole idea that he ran the table yesterday is untrue. And he's going to ignore the House and pretend that he won Senate seats, which he did. And it may well be to his credit in the sense that he may well have had a difference in terms of how, let's say, Indiana turned out, or Missouri, or even North Dakota. Always hard to tell. He may have made a difference in Florida, where he's from. I mean, he's from New York, but, he spent lots of time in Florida. And, that may be true, but at the same time, other things are also true.
Yes.
A Democrat from Pennsylvania, where the Democrats won 3 GOP House seats yesterday, Brendan Boyle, noted that Trump tweeted this. Trump tweeted, "If the Democrats think they're going to waste taxpayer money investigating us at the House level, then we will likewise be forced to consider investigating them for all the leaks of classified information and much else at the Senate level. Two can play at that game." That was his response. And U.S. Representative Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania, too, said, "Thank you, Donald Trump, for your gracious congratulations message. We could not have won without you."
Yeah. Nice job.
Which is pretty much true. I mean, he really helped Democrats win in the House. There's no question about it.
Yeah. So he'll want credit for that eventually. I don't know exactly how he'll spin it, but okay, I'd be willing to give it to him on that front. Pennsylvania did come up pretty big, and a lot of people pointing out maybe also had a little something to do with the inability to gerrymander it for Republicans this time around.
Which we knew was going to be part of the picture. And, of course, Wolf, the governor running a strong top of the ticket, also had a big influence on that as well.
That's true.
So other little stories here. Angie Craig unseats Jason Lewis in Minnesota. Freshman Jason Lewis, Republican, I believe, is a rematch where Lewis beat Craig by 2 points 2 years ago. Now, not only is Craig openly LGBTQ, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, Jason Lewis was the one that's complaining about how he can't refer to women as derogatory language anymore. He was really disappointed about that.
Right. Yeah, well, now he
was bemoaning the fact that he couldn't call them sluts anymore.
Yes. That is a big problem.
Said, "Don't bother me for saying stuff like that. I'm paid to be provocative," he said.
Yeah.
Well, he lost.
Oh, okay. Well, now he's going to have plenty of time he'll have plenty of time to spend more of it with his, I don't know what. I mean, I don't know if his family likes him any better than the rest of us do.
No, he can spend more time with his man cave, right?
Yeah, I guess that's basically it. He'll
go down there and seal the door and go ahead and be provocative. Nobody cares. You don't have a microphone anymore.
Awesome. Go ahead. He'll be podcasting in weeks.
And then the two stories I also want to add, we'll get those in before the break, I think. First, in Maine, there's only one Republican congressman left in New England.
Oh. Bruce
Polkwin. And he leads by 0.4% or 1,000 votes, 1,037 votes over Jared Golden, with 73% of precincts reporting. A lot of the little ones haven't come in yet. Significance there? Well, Poliquin has 46.2% of the vote, and Jared Golden has 45.7%. Tiffany Bond, the independent, has 5.7%, and William Hoare, Hoar, has 2.4%. So what, you say? Well, Maine is doing ranked choice voting now.
Oh.
So what you do is you go to the independents, the 5.7% and the 2.4%, and you start reallocating their votes based on their second and third choices.
Oh, if no one gets...
If nobody gets 50%.
Okay. Oh, alrighty then.
So
what kind of independents
Bruce
were
Poliquin
they?
is currently leading by 1,000 votes, and he may win or he may lose based on the also-rans. I mean, this would be the first time something like this is happening, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes down.
Yeah, and how people feel about it, the candidates and the voters. I mean,
right.
You can't
we voted
blame
for
yourself.
this. Oh, it happened. That's terrible.
Oh, no. I hate myself. That sometimes
Jerry
happens.
Bolton just pulled ahead by some cockamamie scheme that some idiot called voters put in here.
Right. It will be interesting to see. I mean, it's a great theory, and it will be, like I said, it will be interesting.
Let's see whether they'll accept it. I don't know. It's really interesting.
It just occurred to me not seconds ago, I guess, what I suppose this means is, I mean, I guess people probably just bullet vote also. I don't know whether you have to rank anybody beyond your number one, but you have to. Does that mean you have to study the also rans and figure out, all right, well, which one of these idiots would I vote for second if my guy doesn't? It's a good question. I've not really contemplated that.
Well, let me just, before the break, quote H.L. Mencken, if I may. Democracy is the theory that the common people know what they want, and they deserve to get it, good and hard.
Yeah, and I guess...
Does that not apply here?
I guess so. Well, this is pretty amazing. I hadn't really thought it all the way through. It certainly sounded like a good concept, and that would mean that you could vote your conscience, and if your conscience doesn't match anybody else's in the entire state, well, then you get a second shot. But
it's
I
like
hadn't thought about
all
what
you
to do
people
with the
pestering me to pay attention to something I never heard of. Here it is. Let's go look at it.
Okay, well, good. A big day in the sun for ranked preference voting. That'll be fun. All right, we'll be right back after this.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We are back. I'm back anyway. Greg is running an errand inside the house, so that one takes too long. Should be back any moment, but lots to catch up on and some very good and very interesting and very crazy stories still to come. I'm trying to keep up with things and grabbing various tweets as they go by. I think I could probably fill out the rest of the show just by reading the tweets that I found interesting last night, although a lot of the highlights that they were intended to focus on have already been hit here this morning. I don't see how you could do it any other way. Armando is up-end tweeting, and tweeting an interesting fact. I guess he's got I don't know whether this is a long running back and forth going or not, but let's see, I guess talking about what was going on in Florida, of course, and he's chiming in on people, I guess, who are particularly down about the Andrew Gillum race. And I don't know whether anyone was offering any particular criticism of the way the race was run. But Armando has jumped in to say, sorry to burst the bubble, at least in Florida, but Gillum had the exact same result as Alex Sink in Florida in 2010. Nothing to celebrate in Florida, though. He says, don't let anyone fool you. Still a massive disappointment, at least for him. And we have very hard thinking ahead in Florida, though I guess the thinking changes somewhat with a vast pool of newly restored voting rights to tap into next time around. I hope that makes a big difference. But, yes,
Florida was the big disappointment of the day, without question.
Yeah, and that almost set the very Republican favorable tone of the morning, but enough reporters and prognosticators and pundits, I think, stayed up late to at least let it sink in that it wasn't in fact, a huge disappointment across the board. And the early debate on whether or not it could even conceivably be called a wave election was driven by early results from Florida. And the early conventional wisdom among the punditry was, there's no wave at all, and you're not going to get anything close to it. But waves build as they move east to west, and the Midwest picked up the pace. And the further west the time zones, the later it got, and the further west the results coming in came from, the better it looked.
Right. And so, no, this wasn't 2016. So let me talk a little bit about that, because we got some pundits who were weighing in on that I picked up in the pundit roundup.
Okay.
And, hey, I mean, I haven't even gotten to my dead pimp wins in Nevada story yet.
There's only one state, I think, that could bring you that story.
Right. So was it a wave? Was it a rebuke? Well, James Oliphant points out with Evers winning in Wisconsin, Democrats went 7 for 8 in Senate governor races in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, all states Trump won in 2016. Okay. Harry Enton says he's now working for CNN, used to work for 538 and The Guardian before that. See, to me, this is a wave election. In the House, where the entire country got to vote, Democrats are winning with ease. That's the popular vote. Mm-hmm. And the same is true in the Senate, by the way, as I pointed out. Further, there have been some surprises, which is indicative of a wave in my mind. And we're talking about places like Staten Island and Oklahoma, some of the stuff we went over. John Harwood says the Democratic control of the House is an earthquake event for Trump's presidency. Nate Cohen weights in and says, it feels like the white, rural, ex-urban South held for Republicans, and that's what happened in Florida, and maybe not so much elsewhere, and that's what happened in the Midwest.
Yeah, well,
and then Jonathan Ladd, who is a political scientist, had one of my favorite quotes of the night. The Republicans will gain a few seats in the Senate, and the Democrats will win a comfortable margin in the House. No prediction website said this was a likely result, except for every major prediction website.
Oh, well, too bad for that.
Yeah. Dave Wasserman, all 319 solid D or R or 28 lean or likely D races went as expected.
Okay.
The Republicans won 28 of 29 likelies, except for Oklahoma. The Republicans won 27 of 29 lean Rs, except for Staten Island and South Carolina, Mark Sanford's district. Of the toss-ups, 11 went D, 8 R, and 12 were too close to call.
Okay.
So the toss-ups were toss-ups. The Republicans won the ones they were supposed to. The Democrats won the ones they were supposed to. It wasn't the realigning election in that sense. But there were enough toss-ups so that the Democrats are able to win.
And there's still some outstanding, and depending on how they break, that'd be funny if they did all or mostly break one way, and then 2 weeks later, hey, it was a wave.
Yeah, but it's a wave anyway. But it's a small wave. And, I'm just seeing Republican Bob Stefanowski has conceded, and Ned Lamont has won the race for governor, which is always nice.
Oh, okay.
But let's just run some of those down here. The New York Times very conveniently in their House results sort of breaks all of this down. Let's tell you about the ones that are outstanding that we haven't called yet. Arizona 1, D plus 6. California 49, D plus 4.8. I think that's Mike Levin over Diane Harkey. That's Darrell Iss's old district, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. And Washington 8. That's Kim Schreier over Dino Rossi. Dino Rossi's going to lose.
Yes,
which
right.
is nice. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 districts leaning Democratic that haven't been called yet, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8. 8 Republicans that haven't been called yet.
Okay.
That they're leaning toward. But some of them are close. I'm looking at some of these. Maine 2, the Bruce Polikin one, R plus 0.4. Minnesota 1, R plus 0.6. North Carolina 9, R plus 0.6. These are 1,000 votes, 2,000 votes. New Jersey 3, that's Tom MacArthur over Andy Kim by 2,000 votes.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all incredibly close races. There's a ton of them. They could have gone the other way and been, 9 or 10 or 11 extra pickups one way or the other. So even in the Republican-favored seats, Will Hurd in Texas, he's only winning by 680 votes.
That's I mean, and in the end, at the end of the day,
he was supposed to like cruise there. No pun intended. Instead, he got vetoed.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what the situation always was supposed to be, and depending on how the coin falls.
Right. So this is where you have to extrude yourself, shield yourself from Florida disappointment and say, you know what, it really wasn't a bad night for Democrats.
Yeah. Okay, so Florida was disappointing, but we've vastly changed the face of the electorate. Managed to do that, which is a surprise given how disappointing the rest of the performance was. But
I was just cruising over to Daily Kos and looking at the pundit roundup, and one of our Virginia. Remember I told you Virginia? I like Virginia.
You did say that.
One of our Virginia commenters points out, my favorite loss was Corey Stewart losing to Tim Kaine in Virginia. I live in Prince William County, where Stewart has been chair of the County Board of Supervisors for the past 12 years. He is a worthless, bigoted, lying, self-centered, racist, Trump-supporting, deceitful piece of crap, and those are his good points.
All right. Yes, I tend to agree. I don't hear that much about him, luckily, even though he's only one county over. But
right. In Stewart's losing speech last night, he suggested he may be through with politics and not run for county board again.
Terrific. Yeah. How do you keep them down on the county board once they have had a taste of losing for Senate?
Yeah, pretty much. So before I go, let me just tell you this story. This is in the LA Times by David Montero. He may be dead, but pimp Dennis Hoff, H-O-F, pimp Dennis Hoff wins bid for Nevada Senate Assembly seat.
Okay.
Right?
What do we do?
Even in death, Dennis Hoff remains larger than life. The pimp and reality television star easily cruised to victory Tuesday in his race for a seat in the Nevada State Assembly 21 days after his death. Hoff died October 16th at the Love Ranch, his brothel, just outside the city of Pahrump.
Really?
Pahrump. Isn't that like what Mel Brooks used to say when he was governor in Blazing Saddles?
Pahrump. Maybe.
Pahrump. After being found unresponsive by male porn star Ron Jeremy following a campaign event. You can't make this stuff up here. The Clark County Coroner's Office had not released the cause of death. His win wasn't a huge surprise in his heavily Republican district that stretches over 3 counties, the largest of which is Nye, and went for President Trump by a wide margin. Now, for you process people, and you wouldn't be listening to Kagro in the morning if you weren't process people, what happens to his seat? The guy dies, but he wins. And so, what happens? Well, according to the Nevada Secretary of State, a Hoff victory would ensure the state assembly seat would remain in Republican hands because the 3 county commissioners convene and select a replacement from the GOP.
Okay. Ron Jeremy wins.
Yeah. Chuck Muth, Hoff's campaign chairman, told a crowd of 500 at a memorial service for Hoff over the weekend he expected a win. He feels pretty good, but I won't be completely satisfied until it's official. I don't know if he means the election is official or his death is official.
Yes.
Hard to tell here with this story.
Yeah. That's, I don't know. Well, okay.
Right? Top Republicans in the state avoided Hoff, refusing to endorse him, but he won anyway. Now, here's where it gets weird.
Yes.
This is in the piece here. Nevada Department of Public Safety took over the investigation, which officials from the Nevada Department of Corrections said Tuesday is ongoing despite Hoff's death because claims of sexual assault. He's also faced other sexual assault allegations, including an incident, just reading from the story here, in 2011 in which Jennifer O'Rourke said Hoff raped her at his brothel. She said she's still traumatized. She was relieved he was dead because now he can't hurt anyone anymore. Like That's tragic and, real. But then she goes on to say, if she still lived in the district, she'd vote for Hoff now that he's dead.
That is surprising. I mean, I understand the point.
She says, I'm fine with him being dead and winning. Yeah. I guess she's, a solid Republican. She didn't want a Democrat taking that seat.
Man, that's really surprising. But
I know a lot of people, she said, who are going to vote Democrat if he were alive because he's a horrible person, but will now vote Republican because he's dead. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of how deep partisanship runs.
I guess so. Wow. I mean, that's a very weird thing to say.
I mean, this is not funny, amusing. This is like you read this and you go, okay, I want to explain to you about partisanship and how important it is to people. And this is an example.
I don't know if I really am up to dissecting that. That's too
I'm just
hard.
saying, this is the story. It's right here in the LA Times, and you read it and you scratch your head and say, this is different than normal.
Yes, to say the least. Okay, well, there was a strong hint that there was something going to be out of the ordinary in this race. And
so there's that. And that seat will be Republican. But I'm not sure exactly. Again, there's so many outstanding races, meaning not settled yet, with counts and so on and so forth, that I'm not really sure what's going to wind up happening, whether the Democrats get a supermajority or anything like that in Nevada. I got to go find John Ralston later after he wakes up.
Okay. Yes. He's probably out for a while.
Right. And so let's just finish with Politico, who observes this morning House Democrats are ready to clash with Trump. Pelosi, by the way, Nancy Pelosi is going to be Speaker.
Oh, does anybody mention that?
I just thought I would because we hadn't mentioned it all morning. Good. And she's a very good vote counter, and things will happen. Pelosi is poised to return to the Speaker's chair and will lead an emboldened majority eager to take on the president. May I just point out, by the way, running against Nancy Pelosi didn't win the House for Republicans. We've had this discussion throughout the entire race. Well, Nancy Pelosi, we're running against San Francisco values and Nancy Pelosi. That didn't help them.
Right. That is true. In fact, one of the races I saw, battle notes on, after action notes. I guess it was down in Florida where she showed up to campaign for Donna Shalala, who is going to be a member of the House now.
Oh, by the way, who won?
Yes, and who had apparently had a lot of, let's say, self-appointed Democratic strategists worried the whole time. Oh, no, we can't win this House race with her. Well, yeah, you can.
Oh, sounds like Bob Menendez.
Yeah, and when Pelosi showed up to campaign for her, that's when the Proud Boys showed up in that district in Florida and started a near riot in protesting her presence, and they felt sure that would rally the Republican to victory there, and in fact did the opposite. So great job.
Yeah, somebody asked on Twitter the other day, I think it was Joe Weisenthal. So what demographic group have Republicans really increased their share with since their win in 2016? And of course, my answer was Nazis.
Yes, dead pimps.
I
guess.
So this is the way that the House story here in Politico is written up. House Democrats were romping to victory in Tuesday's midterm elections in a stinging defeat for President Donald Trump that breaks the GOP stranglehold on power in Washington and immediately brings up the question of impeachment into play next year. For those of you who feel like you didn't win enough last night, that's how Washington is looking at it.
Okay.
The Democratic triumph could also propel Nancy Pelosi back into the Speaker's chair after 8 years in the minority. Of course, it's not a done deal. People have to vote for her first. And a lot of people elected said they weren't going to vote for her. So does she have enough votes to win? A historic comeback that would add to the California Democrats' already legendary career. It would make her the most important Democrat in the country and favorite foil for Trump until Democrats pick their 2020 presidential nominee. Pelosi hasn't formally announced that she'll run for Speaker. It's expected to do so on Wednesday. That would be today. She'd have to win 218 Democrats to win the Speaker's gavel, which may not be easy since a cluster of Democratic candidates who won Tuesday night have said they will not back her. Still, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee Chair Ben Ray Lujan introduced Pelosi to a crowded room as your next Speaker. Okay, so what do you take away from that story? Once Democrats gain a formal position and have their voice, all of a sudden, Politico, the whisperer in Washington along with Axios, is starting to write triumphal stories about Democrats. Something that's been missing for 2 years.
True. So, good news. Yeah, they love being cozy with power. That's true.
Yep, so I just thought I would point that out. That doesn't, mean that all of a sudden Democrats are all powerful or everything has changed, but a whole lot has changed. And John Harwood is right. It's an earthquake in Washington, and you see it play out just in the way that the news covers these particular individuals. Pelosi could have said the exact same thing 2 days ago, and you wouldn't even have read about it because nobody would be covering it.
Yeah, true. Okay, well, that's the big change.
That's a big change. All right, so anyway, a lot happening, and that's my attempt to summarize it all for you, give you the big picture and the abbreviated pundit roundup. So with that, this is Greg Dworkin speaking to my good friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. Joan will come on, hopefully, and give us her perspective from a little bit west of where we are.
Yes, some good news to share from where she is, too. Okay, very good. And tomorrow we'll remind ourselves that they won the House once again and start off that way.
We might even have some stories to read about it.
Yeah, possibly. Okay, thanks very much, Greg.
Take care.
Thank you. You do the same. I'm going to go to sleep now, and I'll see you all tomorrow. It's really starting to hit me now how tired I really am. And I didn't stay up that much later than usual, but, well, things are a little bit off kilter here in the house as it happens anyway. And so that only compounds the error of having stayed up a little bit later. Let's see. We have some comments that we can share that'll help us get through the difficult stretches of the morning. Let's see. Michael Musson noting Ted Cruz almost went down. Ted, whose colleague said, I don't mind Ted as much as most people here. I hate him. I guess that means I merely hate him. But, yeah, I guess he and his cans of soup coming back to the Senate, unfortunately. But as we were discussing yesterday in the case of John Ossoff in the Georgia 6th District and the organizing that he did there and the legacy that he left behind, similar thing happening in Texas. A lot more, other good results for Dems in Texas that probably couldn't have happened but for the O'Rourke organizing efforts. And hopefully those who organized with and behind Beto O'Rourke will take the same sorts of lessons and not simply, kick the dirt and give up that, I voted once and it didn't work. And I don't see any indication, there's no particular reason to believe that that's representative of anybody who joined in the efforts there. I think everybody knew it was going to be a long-term project. Even had he won, turning Texas blue for good is a long-term project. I think everybody probably signed up with that in mind. And we'll start to see more good fallout from his efforts and the time he spent, the money he raised, and the money he spent in organizing Texas can only help build for the future. So I expect great things there as well. And let's see. What else have we got? Maureen is annoyed about something here. She's growling and sends us her earlier comment. The pundit press BS starts. Dem House full of women. The CBC and progressives will support future Speaker Nancy Pelosi. All right. And I guess, is this the BS that we're looking at? The CNN tweet here. Democrats are set to hold their House leadership elections the week after Thanksgiving. It's unclear if Democratic Representative Nancy Pelosi will remain the party's leader. And I guess technically it's unclear. That hasn't been declared to be the case just yet. But, well, you can take my usual quick and dirty estimation tool and take a look at the amount of money spread around by the various contenders for leadership offices. And that will usually provide a rough guide, a rough outline to who is going to win. You can refine things a little bit more and still stay in the money realm. You can look at just the aggregate dollar total dispersed to candidates in this election cycle. You can get an even better view of things if you do the research and figure out how many Democrats to whom they offered financial support actually made it into the House. That's a little bit tougher of a project, requires a little bit more time checking on all the results everywhere, but that would obviously give you a slightly better picture of things, because, I mean, if you spread your money around and supported all the Democrats who didn't actually make it into the House. Well, though you dispersed a lot of funds and boosted your prospects, generally speaking, if they're not there to vote for you, that's not going to help a great deal. So there's that analysis. And if you really want to refine it, you would take a good look at lifetime contributions and as among Democrats who are, of course, there to vote. And in all likelihood, both by virtue of the position she occupies inside of the Democratic caucus and chicken and egg here, this is how she got to occupy that position in the Democratic caucus. She's a prolific fundraiser and a prolific campaigner and distributor of campaign funds. So, it goes hand in hand. It's not, it's a very cold analysis to simply look at the money. And I use it, I formulate it that way to stress the point that these are not typically ideological elections, leadership elections inside of the House or House caucus or Republican House conference, as they call it. But it does tend to be predicted by money, but it's not determined by money. The two different expressions of the same, or two relatively similar formulae, I guess. By which I mean this. If you are a prolific fundraiser and you are generous with the funds that you raise, you, yes, curry favor among members of the Democratic caucus for leadership positions. But it doesn't all come down to sending checks. It often helps, and you should get extra points in this. I just don't know how to score it in order to do the research. But if you show up in district to campaign for that person, or show up in D.C. at their D.C. fundraisers to try and bring some star power, some drawing power to their fundraisers, that counts too. But another way of looking at it is, are you involved with the other members of your House Democratic caucus, or on the other side with Republicans? Are you close? Do you make a personal effort? Is there a personal connection between the two of you? And even if it's simply based on the transactional notion of you helped me get elected, that's a very real connection, and that's more determinative of the votes for leadership positions than almost anything else. Yes, it's easiest to describe in terms of money, but the intangibles that go along with the money go a long way too. And then, of course, it begins to feed on itself. Once you are in a position of leadership, you are capable of raising much more money. Yes, a lot of it means a lot of it will come from lobbyists who are trying to buy a piece of the power you've now accrued as a leader inside of the caucus, but it leverages a lot more money, and that gives you the ability to distribute much more of it and shore up your position with even more votes next time around. So there are some very real contributions that are being made, some very real connections that are being made, and it feeds back on itself, and that's why that's also part of the story of the power of incumbency in general, not just inside the caucus and in leadership positions, but in the actual positions you hold as elected members of the House as well. So I saw a lot of calls among activists who were excited about some of the various wins and some of their favorite candidates winning, and a lot of calls for their preferred candidates to stand for speaker. But most of them will not have done the kind of groundwork that is, they will have had no opportunity to do so to date, although some of them have been in the House for a while. I saw a lot of support expressed for Barbara Lee, who certainly has had a long enough career to be considering a move into leadership. But I also saw lots of calls for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has not had the opportunity to do that, may yet have it in the future, has done a lot of supportive work for other Democrats in the interim between her win of her primary and the general election, since it was a heavily Democratic district. Was probably the best way she could have used her time and any excess campaign funds to start to build that network. It's just she's not had time or the resources to rival the networks built over years or even decades of work by those who currently occupy leadership positions in the House. By the same token, the same skill that makes Nancy Pelosi so adept at counting votes and getting things done even in divided government and getting things done that are advantageous to Democrats even in Republican-led divided government, as she's been able to do in the past. The same skills that she exhibits there, she exhibits, of course, inside the Democratic caucus. That's how she comes to lead the Democratic caucus and stay there in the majority and the minority. And over many, many years, she recognizes that there's a very legitimate role for newcomers with their own bases of support, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And she very frequently in the past has gone out of her way to make sure that they are heard and included in leadership. Now, you can't just open up the doors and say, well, either she's going to be speaker or we're going to make her, majority leader or anything like that. That's a position that requires a lot more groundwork and a lot more experience typically in order to win it. And it's also not an assigned position. It's an elected position. But she very frequently will reach down into the ranks of the freshman class, the first termers, and create positions for them or create important policy panels within the Democratic caucus and put them at the head of it. So look to see some of that happening in the next couple of months. Welcome back now to the second hour of the Kagro in the Morning Show. Second hour makes it sound like it's going on for so long. And by the end of the show, I'll regret not having read you more of the stories and tweets that I've put aside, so we might as well get on to it. But when we left off, just filling in the blanks in terms of what happens next and what you should expect with Nancy Pelosi and whether or not she will ascend to the speakership again or whether it's worth speculating why she wouldn't or couldn't. But that's the political press. They need for something to be up in the air and something to be exciting for a while here. So, okay, that's what they'll be doing for the next couple of days. The next couple of weeks or so will determine the outcome of that question, and people will be positioning themselves and reminding all the people that they supported both financially and with campaign support and in whatever other form they might have expressed their support, reminding all those people that those chits are now due. And after those leadership positions are set, and, remember, speakership, of course, technically, it's a constitutional position, of course, but the nomination for the Democrats, how do we put it? The Democrats will nominate their leader as a candidate for speaker. Republicans will do the same with their leader. And then, of course, the actual position of the speakership is determined on the first day of the new Congress in the beginning of January of next year when the roll call vote is held. But for all intents and purposes, usually, absent some very unusual circumstances we haven't seen for, I'm sure, over 100 years, the majority party's nominee is simply the presumptive speaker. And, that's another thing. All of the candidates who, along the way, depending on exactly how they put it during the campaign when they were asked whether they would support Nancy Pelosi for speaker, and a lot of people felt for some reason that it was necessary to distance themselves from her in order to win these seats, there will now arise the question of what exactly did they mean when they said they might not or wouldn't support Nancy Pelosi for speaker. For some, they will view this as meaning that under no circumstances can they be seen voting for Nancy Pelosi to become Speaker of the House, period. Others will say that what they really meant was that inside the House Democratic Caucus, should they win election to the House, inside the House Democratic Caucus, they would support an alternative nominee for Speaker, but then might find through various methods of persuasion that once the nomination had been made inside the Democratic Caucus, then it was a time for all of those elected to the House as Democrats to accept that outcome, much as they insisted others do for them when they won their respective primary elections in the past election cycle. And for some people, that will be very meaningful, and will hold a great deal of sway. It happened to me. I happened to win, in some cases, they might say, a contested and maybe even contentious primary, and I fully expected that my opponent and my opponent's supporters would come around for the good of the Democratic Party and support me in the general election. That made a great deal of sense to me, and I'm now being asked to do exactly the same thing. I can cast my vote for nominations for Speaker for any of the alternatives that my constituents might prefer, if that's even the case. And then, having expressed my opinion clearly but lost, for the good of the party here in D.C., inside the House, the institution to which I now belong, and where I hope to be able to make a difference under the watchful eye of the woman who's likely to become Speaker anyway, I will do what's best for our party organization here, just as I asked others to do for me back home, and support her on the floor. Whether there are a large number of newly elected Democrats who would likewise insist that they cannot cast a vote for Nancy Pelosi on the floor, in the final analysis, I don't know. But that's another part of Nancy Pelosi's job now. Of course, she'll want the clearest and largest vote total possible, but she's also a pragmatist and a good vote counter, and she may be content to say, all right, so long as I have my 218 votes for me as Speaker, that gives me a certain number of passes I can give out to those newly elected or otherwise Democrats who, in my view, would most greatly benefit politically from being allowed ahead of time, agree ahead of time that they should be permitted to cast a dissenting vote in order to deliver on whatever sort of campaign promise they feel compelled to live up to. I don't know if all the people, I don't know how many, I never really bothered to keep track of how many candidates were actually saying that they would indulge in this exercise, but I am sure that count is being prepared now, and they're just trying to figure out, can we accommodate them? Should we accommodate them? Do we have enough votes to accommodate all of them? Should we, even if we have the numbers, or should we try and twist a few arms here and make a change? I don't know. Let's see. We'll find out. And someone's running the numbers now, and Nancy Pelosi will have access to them, and she may have already run them in her head. She's just good at this. So look forward to seeing how that one comes out. If you're looking for ideological change in the leadership, typically you're going to want to look, I guess what you would call down ballot in the leadership races, and especially in places where there is an open position, if there is any. Now that I'm thinking it through here, I imagine Steny Hoyer wants to stay where he is. Clyburn, I imagine, would want to stay where he is, although I guess there's some possibility that either of them might be convinced to give way, but nobody campaigned on not voting for Steny Hoyer or Jim Clyburn, I don't think. And I guess just before the break, the other point I left off with was you're going to want to keep your eyes open in the months to come. This will take probably until January to have all of this stuff settled. Nancy Pelosi will be prevailing upon the Steering and Policy Committee inside the House, the Democratic House Steering and Policy Committee, to make sure that prizes are available to be claimed by the newly elected members of the Democratic caucus, particularly those who made a splash either on Election Day or during their campaigns or even earlier, as the case is with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, or who are some of the various firsts to be elected to the House. And here I mean creating positions inside the Democratic caucus, whether that's regional whip positions, which have already been used and already exist and have been created. The whip organization, chief, now will be the House Majority Whip, and I guess that falls to Clyburn now, and he'll have the opportunity to appoint various deputies. Then regional whips, you'll be responsible for your, tri-state area, wherever you may live, and or whatever. And you can bring people into the fold that way. And then there's even other creations, like, for instance, in addition to things like plum committee seats, and there Pelosi has also been very active and effective in reaching down into the caucus and putting I got to stop saying freshmen, newly elected, first-term members on very powerful select committees, which is usually not the case. But the last couple times around, we've seen Democrats who have made, for instance, their tax plans a prominent part of their campaign, finding their way onto the Ways and Means Committee, which is usually not the case for first-term members. When they run out of such positions, as sometimes happens in these elections where larger classes are elected, they create positions. They will formulate a House Democratic Caucus tax policy task force and populate it with newly elected members and more junior members of the caucus for whom there was no room on the House Ways and Means Committee, for instance. Things like that. You have a lot of flexibility if you're just going to be creating caucus positions. And you hand those out as necessary, like candy, if need be, to make sure that prominent newly elected members of the House can go back and say, I'm already moving up in leadership. I'm already being listened to by the Speaker. And that usually does the trick, generally speaking. All right, let's see. Some other notes that have come in the past few minutes. Let's see. Greg sends us this one here from Nick Riccardi. This tweet: don't get fooled by reports that 99% of precincts are in Arizona. Okay, I will not get fooled by that. What does it mean? That's only Election Day votes that have been tallied. There's a huge tranche. Boy, we haven't heard the word tranche in some time. A huge tranche of early votes, interesting, that ironically still have not been counted, even though they had plenty of time to do it. As much as 1/4 of the total vote. We may not know the results then of the Arizona Senate race for days. Well, that can happen. So yeah, between early votes and absentee ballots and all sorts of things, I guess 99% of precincts are in, but I guess absentee ballots, do they get counted as precinct votes? You could even have 100% of precincts in, but not the other things that are sort of counted outside of the precinct, the precinct structure. Okay, let's see. He also sends us, Greg does, the Manu Raju tweet here: McCarthy versus Jordan for House Minority Leader. That's right. Jim Jordan reelected regardless of all this. And now, I guess in a contest, having lost the House, this sometimes throws things into disarray, as the top leader very often in both parties, but not as much lately with the Democrats. But very often you lose the majority, and people expect that you'll either step down or that you should expect to be challenged for leadership. So McCarthy versus Jordan for House Minority Leader. McCarthy heavily favored in the secret ballot election, mostly because he already occupies the spot. The question is, has he been keeping up with his campaign donations to people? Does anybody get mad about the fact that he gets caught on tape saying that he is pretty sure that Trump gets paid by Putin? Or LOL, YOLO, nothing matters, and that doesn't count against him anymore? I have no indication that Jim Jordan has been doing any of the fundraising and fund distributing work that it would take for him to replace McCarthy. But Republicans, as between the two parties, are the more likely, believe it or not, to cast their votes for leadership on an ideological basis. They don't usually succeed in overthrowing the existing regime on an ideological basis, but it does sometimes happen. It's just that Jim Jordan doesn't really bring any of that to the table, to be honest. Okay, so let's see. He also sends me the list sent around by Matthew Chapman of the most odious people kicked out the door last night, most of whom we have mentioned, but some of whom we have not. Top on the list, and who has not gotten mentioned, Dean Heller. We forgot to mention that one, but that's absolutely, well, I guess nothing's absolutely true just yet, but I believe that's where we stand with that race. We also did mention, of course, Scott Walker. Bruce Rauner, I don't think got a mention. Chris Kobach definitely did. Dana Rohrabacher got an early mention. Pete Sessions, Dave Bratt, Claudia Tenney as well. And finally, because she's not a member of Congress, not a governor, we haven't gotten around to it, Kim Davis, the county clerk in Kentucky, who essentially became a Republican quite some time ago and gained notoriety. That's the best possible spin you can give it, for refusing to issue same-sex marriage licenses in Kentucky. And I guess the best part about that story is she's gone, and that's terrific. The more interesting part of the story, buried among the many tweets that I parked in Pocket overnight, though I see some of them that I thought I parked are not there. Maybe they are in my Twitter feed. But she lost to one of the very people to whom she denied a marriage license. And he took it upon himself to say, I will be the one that gets rid of Kim Davis. And lo and behold, it has worked. So excellent. Well done there. Very glad to see that outcome. Other things that I put aside for discussion today. Let's see. Boy, there's a lot. One election day story that we didn't get to yet, reported by Raw Story. Georgia Republican candidate Brian Kemp. I think you're all familiar with him. This was an interesting story. Foiled, at least temporarily, by his own state's voter ID law when he tried to vote. This was a very weird little story. Georgia Secretary of State and Republican gubernatorial candidate Brian Kemp had problems with his voter ID when he went to cast his ballot on Election Day. This is Noor Al-Sibai's reporting at Raw Story. It turns out his voting card was invalid. A reporter with Atlanta's WSB-TV revealed in a video report on Kemp's issues voting at his polling place in Winterville, Georgia. According to the Georgia Secretary of State website, voters must present a Georgia driver's license, government employee ID, valid U.S. passport, valid military ID, valid tribal ID, or a free voter ID card distributed through a county registrar or Department of Driver Services office. The ABC affiliate did not explain what the issue with the candidate's identification was, and added that Kemp was eventually able to cast his ballot. But apparently something out of order with the ID he chose to use, one of whatever it was, being expired. So I retweeted that one yesterday, thought it was kind of a funny story. A lot of people came back and said, oh, this was absolutely a staged event. And he somehow meant for it to illustrate, I'm not above the law. Even Brian Kemp, Secretary of State, will be challenged if I dare to show up with ID that doesn't meet my demanding standards. Maybe, although it that had the feel to me of like the Jim Trafficant excuse. Like I said, this was not me trying to commit voter fraud. I mean, really, honestly, given the way Kemp has reacted, had reacted to the revelation that the Secretary of State's website was vulnerable to hacking, and then trying to make it look like he was launching an investigation into the people who reported that as hackers, saying it was merely a failed hacking attempt, which was a pretty weird story. I don't see why at this point you wouldn't demand that Brian Kemp be charged with attempted voter fraud. After all, he showed up with a fraudulent or invalid ID, and we know that the only people who would do that are people who are attempting to commit voter fraud. But I guess we won't live long enough to see those charges leveled. But I thought maybe it was a Jim Trafficant excuse, like you caught me doing this, but really it was a secret undercover sting operation. I was trying to sting poll workers to see whether they could detect my very obviously invalid ID, just to be sure that I could demonstrate to people how impossible it would be under my regime with these rules to commit voter fraud by the millions among illegal immigrants, which is what I will tell you tomorrow actually happened if I lose this race. So I found it less than convincing. Anyway, let's see. There was also, of course, the issue of various other restrictions, some of which were stayed by the courts, including the exact match voter ID law. But as we saw yesterday in discussing this with Armando, the poll workers don't feel any particular compulsion to abide, in the first instance anyway, by these court rulings. They simply say, you don't have an exact match here, you can't vote. And only if you know your rights and know the story of what happened to the exact match law and can retell it convincingly and are willing to stay there and spend possibly hours of your day fighting over the application or non-application, as the case may be, of the law with poll workers who try to appear that they're speaking with some authority. You know, you have to overcome that intimidation and have the time to spend on it before you can finally cast your ballot. That's a neat little trick all by itself. Simply ignoring the courts and figuring you're years away from any enforcement action, should any come down anyway. And it's very often well worth the time, so to speak. Okay, let's see. By the way, just had a note handed to me here. Not really. Sent to me by Joan McCarter, who says, an explanation for her absence at the moment, I've got to watch McConnell in 10 minutes. If he's short, I'll join you after. If I can't, well, we'll cover a Medicaid expansion story. Of course, you will remember last time we spoke with Joan, she told us that Medicaid expansion was poised for victory in Idaho, of all places. Of course, you wouldn't say of all places if you lived in Idaho. You would simply say, here's the news, as she did. And it wasn't just Idaho, a lot of other surprising places as well. And so if we are unable to connect with her, in other words, if McConnell goes on at great length, as I am doing right now, we'll just have to skip it this time around. But I think we can all have a pretty clear picture of what it is she'd have to say on a day like today. It's always more pleasant, of course, to have her say it. But if not, we are prepared to carry on in her stead with the Medicaid expansion story. How will I know? At some point, see if she's listening to McConnell, will she tell me I can't come in because I'm listening to McConnell? And is she listening to me now so that she can know how to respond to that? That's the big question. Me or McConnell? I mean, I think that's a pretty easy choice. Anyway, let's see. Other stories of interest that I put away in Pocket, mostly tweets. And in Pocket, if you're familiar with it at all, you can't always tell exactly what you're looking at. All you can see is the name on the tweet. So I've got a Jessica Bennett on Twitter. I've got a Sam Wang on Twitter. I've even got a Josh Barrow on Twitter, which is an unusual for me. Let's open up some of these things and figure out exactly what the hell it was that they were saying. And it'll be hard to plan a coherent chain of thought here, train of thought, without knowing what they said. But Josh Barrow's comment from last night regarding the pickup in South Carolina's 1st District, the Charleston area. This is a seat that President Trump directly cost the Republicans by playing in the primary. I don't have the clearest recollection of his playing in the primary, of course, but I do, remember, generally speaking, that he found Mark Sanford distasteful, which is, a little pot calling the kettle black thing, but he was looking for a more rabid, Trump-supporting, racist bigot, I guess, basically, figuring down in South Carolina that's going to work just fine. And Mark Sanford hadn't been on board the Trump train, and so it was time to pick another winner. Here, Katie Arrington is the person he went all in for, as that was one of the names that came up in Greg's recapping via the tweets of Allie Maynard. That was another pickup there, another big defeat for Trump-endorsed candidates. So Joe Cunningham, the Democrat, defeats Katie Arrington in a Dem pickup. This is a district that voted 53-41 for Trump in 2016, and which most observers, including the Cook Political Report, considered an upset for Democrats. So well done there. And there you have it. I mean, I think a good assessment by Josh. There's at least one seat, and there are others, where the fingerprints of Donald Trump on the loss are that much clearer. Let's see. What other fun things do we have here? Yes. This one, actually a tweet, not about the election, but I guess it reminds me that we ought to note that another big item among the chattering classes this morning is that Robert Mueller expected back on the scene now that the election is over. Although I was questioning this morning, with so many races not yet called, that won't really bother Mueller, of course, that they haven't been called because all the voting is done. But I'm wondering about races where there's a runoff. What's the DOJ rule on that? Is it enough to wait until after General Election Day and just say, yeah, there'll still be some races at the margin where there'll be runoffs, and, maybe tops, 4 races, 5 races perhaps, that aren't determined until, or in which there's going to be more voting versus those that aren't yet determined, but all the voting is done. So I don't really know what the guidelines say on that, or whether it's inconsequential usually, so they ignore it. So could today be a day where he begins to drop other shoes, or does he wait until all the voting is done, or what? I don't really know. Anyway, I actually was reminded of that by a tweet picked up yesterday from Mark DiStefano, a BuzzFeed UK reporter. And he was pointing to a New York Times article, which I can read because I shamefully subscribe to the New York Times, an issue we'll have to revisit in the near future. A very long article, but he points out the hot piece here for him. New York Times confirms Robert Mueller has obtained the records of Aaron Banks's communications with Russian officials in the Brexit fix over there. All related, of course, and so a surprising development. Perhaps we can talk about that later this week. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. And welcome back once again to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Last segment of the day, and I guess it's beginning to look like Joan will just be tied up waiting for or listening to the McConnell statement, but we'll see, and we'll hold that possibility out there. Let's see. I guess we'll run through the rest of the sometimes unidentified tweets that we can hang on to and use to fill in the blanks here. I don't know which direction we'll run through them on. Let's go back down to the bottom, which would be the earlier ones I put away. Sam Wang, early in the evening, just noting once again I guess part of the effects of gerrymandering and other partisan manipulation of the, I guess, the distribution of representation out there. As he had it last night, the New York Times currently, then I guess middle of the night last night, project a national popular vote margin, which of course doesn't matter for real, of D plus 9.2%. So over 9%. I think it's probably down in the 8s as of late last night. I don't know whether it stayed at 9.2. For comparison, though, I guess for those of us trying to determine whether or not to use the wave terminology, for comparison, the last 5 largest margins, also considered wave elections in their time, were the 1994 elections, R plus 7.1%. That was, of course, not just a wave, but a revolution, as they termed it. The Republican Revolution was an R 7.1% advantage. This is a 9.2% advantage and results in, maybe we won't even call it a wave. Interesting. 2006, the big Dem wave of 8% advantage. We beat that here by 1.25. 2008, D plus 10.6. That's the only one on the chart. Anyway, bigger than yesterday's estimated 9.2%. 2010, a Republican advantage of 7.2%, another, revolution boomlet. Also in 2014, that one just 5.7% advantage to Republicans. By historical standards, it is a popular wave, according to Sam Wang, and so take it for what it's worth, I guess. Let's open them all up here one at a time and just see what the hell we got here. Jessica Bennett is the New York Times writer and author of Feminist Fight Club, who has a list of congressional firsts for us. And as you might imagine, it is chiefly focusing on the women, but then expands into other firsts. But the firsts are Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, youngest woman ever elected to the House. Rashida Tlaib, I guess. I'm going to have to learn how to pronounce a bunch of new names. And Ilhan Omar, first Muslim women elected to the House. And now we have 2 of them. Ayanna Pressley, Massachusetts' first black woman representative. Veronica Escobar and Sylvia Garcia, Texas's first Latina women. And if I have it correct, somewhere out there in the ether of Twitter this morning was circulating the possibility of yet another, depending on final count in another Texas race. We could end up with 3 Texas Latino women all in the same cycle. Sharice Davids and Deb Haaland, I'm guessing Haaland, are, I should know this by now because she's been pretty heavily promoted in this, but the first Native American women elected to the House as well. So a lot of good firsts and a lot of good opportunity to learn the pronunciation of some new names. Let's see. Greg had mentioned Johanna Hayes, the Connecticut's first black woman in Congress. Jared Polis, the first man on the list so far, for being the first openly gay man elected governor, though that was a source of some controversy, as people pointed to Jim McGreevey in New Jersey. But I guess on a technicality, could you say, was he elected as openly gay, or was it? No, I don't think so. And it only became a matter. The matter of the openness came after the election, I think. Is that not correct? Sharice Davis, and it gets a second mention on the list for the first openly gay representative from Kansas. Although there too, as elected, I suppose, but didn't. Who am I thinking of here? Let me go to the Google machine. And no, that's not the way we do it here. Okay. Now I'm confused. All right, Kansas. So all of these are going to come up at first with Sharice David, just because of the way we're the way Google operates. But am I wrong here? I can't even put my finger on a name anymore, just a face. So what am I thinking of here? All right. Well, at any rate, we'll see whether I can make the connection or not. And if those of you in Radio Land can put your finger on what it is I'm thinking of here before I get to it, so much the better. All right. Well, we'll continue with the list. That's more interesting than hearing me stumble around trying to remember what I'm trying to think of here. Advancing age, taking advantage of me here. Marsha Blackburn, I guess, you don't have to celebrate each of the firsts, but it is one. Tennessee's first female senator. Tish James, New York Attorney General, first black woman to hold statewide office in New York, and that seems like a surprise. Janet Mills, first woman elected governor of Maine. Kristi Noem, first woman elected governor of South Dakota. That has been on my radar before. Michelle Lujan Grisham, first Democratic Latina governor of New Mexico. All right. Let's see. A not yet called race would possibly see Young Kim, the first Korean American in Congress, if she wins. I believe a Republican there. So you're allowed to, not root for that one, I suppose, if you want. Let's see. And then some comments to the thread here. Abby Finkenauer in Iowa's first district is 29. She and Cindy Axne, A-X-N-E, are the first women Iowa has ever sent to Congress. I have to really get up to speed on all these new names. And Abby is 2 months younger, says one commenter here. Is that right? Is she younger than Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Is that what that's supposed to mean? I'm not even certain what we're talking about here. Let's see. Joe Neguse, first Eritrean American in Congress and first African American member elected in Colorado, we have pointed out for us. There's an awful lot going on here, and we'll probably be coming up with more firsts for the next couple of days as well. Anybody got comments to add here? No? Okay. So you're all as puzzled as I am. And maybe we'll just never catch up with this one. All right. Well, I'll keep Google open nonetheless and see if I can figure out what I was thinking of and whether or not we ever get around to getting the names I had in mind here. All right. Well, at any rate, man, I wish I could put my finger on what I was thinking of. All right. Well, maybe it'll come to me in the course of further discussions. Let's see. All right. Let's go back to Pocket here and open up the other tweets and see what surprises they have for us. Oh, this Lisa Totsi piece, or this tweet was about the dead pimp story, but we did at least get to mention that. What did she's covering it for BuzzFeed, and I'm wondering whether we have any more interesting takes on it from the less formal reporting, but perhaps not. Maybe it was, I don't know. Let's see. Was that what we were reading or no? Yeah, well, all still very interesting, but I don't know if we get any more detail out of it. It doesn't actually tell us anything new in terms of what the hell to expect or what the hell that's supposed to mean, other than the shock value of being able to say, yes, a dead pimp. Fantastic. Okay. Let's see. Our next tweet in the queue here that came was Josh Barrows here. So let's move on then to this one here from Matthew McGregor, who I put aside so that he could tell us, even with media saturation coverage of U.S. politics, too few people pay attention to where a ton of decisions get made. This is just good political science, everybody. A ton of political decisions get made in the states. The Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, the DLCC, and the state parties have had a blowout. And so you should recognize this. We've been focusing, of course, on the federal level stuff because you can fit that into 2 hours. The state level stuff, you just can't. They won't get the credit they deserve, Matthew continues, but they will get to go to work and make real change. He illustrates the point with a tweet thread that he includes here from Alex Sates-Wald, which makes the following points. This is where this thread leads next. Democrats have flipped, since we were speaking of flipping individual congressional districts, they've flipped 7 entire state legislative chambers, not just the House of Representatives at the federal level. 7 state legislative chambers have been flipped entirely. And this is great counter-narrative to those who were counting far worse numbers in 2016 and noting not only, of course, the lamentable presidential results, but also the very dangerous state results, and pointing out that, look, our current strategists and leaders in the Democratic Party have led us to a very precarious situation where we're actually, I remember right after the 2016 election where we sort of discovered all of a sudden that we were like 1 or 2 states away from the black magic number, I guess you could call it, that it would of states with Republican trifectas, that is, control of both houses of the legislature, where there are 2 houses of the legislature, and the governorship, gave Republicans a shot at, say, being able to call for the convening of a constitutional convention, or to be able to pass constitutional amendments if we accept as a proxy for ratification purposes the holding of a Republican trifecta. And there's pretty good reason to believe that that might really hold water as an analysis. But we were also talking about the number of state legislative seats that had been lost to Republicans over the past several cycles. This time, in addition to flipping 7 entire state legislative chambers, there were also 333 seats flipped from red to blue, and that's pretty good. Although, as I recall, the numbers that they were complaining about, though I think they were over several years, not just one election cycle, but the previous 5 election cycles had seen a loss of something like 1,000 plus state legislative seats to Republicans. Well, a third of them gained back in just one cycle. Not bad, though not all cycles will produce at the same rate. Anyway, that also adds 6 more trifectas for the Democrats. So that was pretty important as well. Few ever pay attention to these races, Alex reminds us, but they are important for redistributing, and waves can be leveraged for major gains. And of course, they also provide the bench for attempts at winning back or holding seats at the federal level later on. So the commenters to this thread asking, where do we have these trifectas? We have Nevada, New Mexico, and Colorado. Guessed off the top of the head. Where are the others? Another commenter answers, Illinois, Maine, and New York, where it's been a long time coming. But yes, Democrats, and real Democrats at that, finally have control of the state Senate there. So definitely worth pointing out. And glad to have that tweet to add to the mix. Let's go back here. I have a new note from Joan mentioning the fact that, well, I guess McConnell just won't shut up. And so it sounds like it'll be awfully difficult to get her pried away from listening to that jerk for any time soon. And we'll have to recap Medicaid expansion for her if we get through these other tweets. Let's see. I also have one parked here from Jesse Lee, who now is at Cap Action. Those of you who remember his stint in the White House for the last 8 years, or the previous 8 years for Barack Obama, and even earlier, his work for the DCCC. We'll be happy to hear from him again. Seems hard to make up a 3% gap with 0% left to report. So now Dems have won more seats than the 2006 blue wave, picking up seats in rural Virginia, Oklahoma, Iowa, multiple in Texas, and apparently Utah, where it sounds like Mia Love is losing. But it's somehow not a wave this time. So question mark for that one. Ben McAdams, the name of the Democratic candidate leading Mia Love. That's the reference to making up the 3% gap with 0% left to report. So that would be fantastic, but a good point there. No one disputed 2006 being a blue wave. It's bigger than that, more pickups than that, and in more unexpected places than that. So I think you may be able to feel perfectly comfortable going with the wave label on this one. Another good point, I guess, accompanying my point about the representation of the Bedminster and Virginia golf courses, favorite haunts of Donald Trump when he's not in Florida playing golf. Those both now being represented by Democrats. Our good friend Dana Hool begins with, or points out for us, it's possible that the entirety of the American border with Mexico, the entire stretch of the border, could also be represented entirely by Democrats. An interesting thing, an interesting result from all of the border fear-mongering that Republicans are doing. You would think, I mean, it's never really been about the border area per se. I mean, the border is where the focus of the screaming goes on. But the people who are most afraid of what lies on the other side of the border are those very often the furthest removed from the border. It's easier to fear the distant menace of the border than it is to worry about immigration when you see what's actually happening. As annoying as it may be, it's just not really all that scary in reality. Let's see, for what purpose does the gentleman known as Southpaw rise? Which tweet of his have I put aside? It's part of just a 2-tweet thread. The one I liked best was the second one, but let's bring this up. He is tweeting in response to Ed O'Keefe, the CBS News political analyst, I guess, or political correspondent is how he's actually styled here. But and this is something I had hoped to discuss with Joan as well, but we might as well throw this one out here. You and I can discuss it, yes. Ed's bad take, essentially, was tweeted thus: Kavanaugh mattered. He puts it this way: 4 of the, quote, big 5 vulnerable Senate Democrats losing tonight: Donnelly, Heitkamp, McCaskill, Nelson. And by the way, I did see in the course of the show the tweet noting that Nelson's campaign manager says that he expects that there would be a recount in that contest. Whether the prospects of coming out on top in that recount are good or not, I do not know. But I guess there's some slim read to cling to there. But anyway, what Ed O'Keefe is saying, that there was indeed the claimed Kavanaugh effect that Republican spinmeisters were so fond of clinging to. Look, Donnelly, Heitkamp, McCaskill, Nelson voted against Kavanaugh, and it quote unquote cost them their seats. All 4 voted against Kavanaugh. The one that did not, that did vote for Kavanaugh, who didn't vote against, Joe Manchin, prevails. Well, that's a controversial call, of course, and there are a lot of people pushing back on that one, both on the basis of West Virginia's weird and on other bases. Southpaw himself pushes back here. There are 4 senators who represent states Trump won in 2016 and who voted against Kavanaugh's confirmation. Each won last night by 6 or more points. So Kavanaugh mattered unless he didn't. Right, Ed O'Keefe? I mean, the Kavanaugh effect is highly debatable, at the very least. That's about the best thing you can say for it. There's just too much there to available for spin on either side to really be able to say. I'm of the opinion that it really couldn't have done that much, and it also is very difficult to imagine, as some others have pointed out. And I don't know whether this one made my roundup or not, but others were pointing out some of these races were lost by relatively significant margins, and in order to erase that margin and put the Democrat over the top, you're talking about believing in the notion that the Kavanaugh vote by itself, if the Kavanaugh vote is what cost the election, you're saying in some cases you're talking about switching your vote on Kavanaugh was really going to produce an extra 7 points for you in the election, 7 percentage point difference. That's a huge stretch of the imagination. And in order to believe that one, you really got to be sold on your narrative. Let's see. Another of the tweets I put aside, Aaron Rupar, who a journalist with Vox, who says on Fox News, this is interesting, the press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, is, I guess, out in the morning. She's out preposterously claiming that the election results reflect Americans coming out, quote, unanimously to, quote, say they're proud of the president and what he has done in the 2 years. That is a rather remarkable reading of things, and even remarkable for Sarah Huckabee Sanders to say. Sanders' analysis of every race she was asked about is that the Republican wins, and it's all because of President Trump, and Aaron says, I'm not even exaggerating. Sanders urges Democrats not to, quote, waste time by investigating Trump if they take the House majority, which they did. But it's ridiculous, starting even from the premise that the Americans came out unanimously to say that they're proud of the president, except they tore control of the House of Representatives out of his party's hands and handed it over in rather overwhelming fashion to Democrats. So super unanimous. There's really no reason in the world to talk, whether on television or in a restaurant, to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And we are in luck. A few minutes we'll have to spare here with Joan McCarter. Joan, hi.
Hi. Sorry about that.
Hey, that's okay. McConnell must have been awfully convincing. Or he went on at some length anyway, I understand.
He went on at some length.
Okay.
He answered he didn't answer a lot of questions. He took a lot of questions.
I see. So he said words at the questions.
Yes. Did you talk Medicaid expansion?
We haven't yet. I have that still in the wings. Why don't we spend our time on that?
I just have to really shout out to the folks at Reclaim Idaho who organized the grassroots effort here. They got more votes out for that ballot measure than were cast in the governor's race.
Wow.
Overall. Almost 10,000 more. Just phenomenal work they did. And it won by 60-40. So,
well, I think
20-point win.
I demand a recount.
Carried a huge number of the states. Carried of the 42 out of 44 counties have reported so far. It won 33 of them.
Okay.
And this is Idaho. I mean, so it makes me wish we had a party organization here.
Well,
we could have gotten some legislative seats off of that. But anyway, it also won in Nebraska and Utah.
Yeah.
Not by those same margins, but enough.
Yes.
So, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people are going to get health care.
Yeah. I was very impressed.
Maine, Wisconsin, and Kansas governors.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that they ran on Medicaid expansion and won. The Democrats there, and possibly even Georgia if the recount or the absentees that are yet to be counted play out.
Would be a nice change.
Abrams hangs on. So
amazing. I was, I guess, not surprised at all, but once again, I guess the pundit bubble almost controlled the narrative for the day. It's like the states we care about, they come in first, and it's East Coast, and we include Florida because we like to fly there for vacation. That's the narrative, everybody. Goodbye. Good night. And then, Idaho, Nebraska, Utah, Maine, Colorado, Washington, all sorts of Oregon, lots where they now have the trifecta locked up again. Waves build as they pull closer to shore, I guess, and the wave just broke in those places that the pundits don't go, I guess.
Yep. There were 6 Democratic flips in legislatures. Maine Senate, New Hampshire House and Senate, New York Senate, Colorado Senate, Minnesota House. A Republican flip, Alaska. Yeah.
Okay.
Oregon House and Senate are supermajorities.
Yes. That's what
3 Republican supermajorities were broken.
Yes.
In both chambers in North Carolina, the Pennsylvania Senate, the Michigan Senate. We got 6 trifectas for Democrats.
Yes.
Maine, New York, Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada, Illinois.
Excellent.
And we broke Republican trifectas in New Hampshire, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Kansas. So, I mean, it was big. It was really big.
Yeah. And I guess now we have to unfortunately start thinking about things like this. But it is notable that some of the big news comes from New Hampshire and, Iowa. And you know what that means. And I don't want to really necessarily turn my attention that way. But
no, we can't talk about that yet.
But it will be very interesting when it comes time to organize Iowa. Now that there are 3 Democratic representatives there, no one's going to know who's the kingmaker. It's going to throw things wide open. It should be an interesting result there, except that they should abandon the caucus. But can't have everything. All right, I'm glad you were able to make it here just briefly, and I mean really briefly, but it was nice to hear your voice. Everybody wanted to hear from you on the day after the election, and no surprise.
If I can pop in again tomorrow.
Oh, well, that would be fantastic. Terrific. All right, well, we love that. Get some rest, but thanks for watching the unwatchable for us. I appreciate it.
Welcome.
And we'll point everybody to your work on the Medicaid story and round up there, and should be a big day on the front page. Thanks for coming by to say hi, Joan. All right. Excellent. All right. We'll see you hopefully tomorrow. That will be fantastic. If not, next week. Time for us, though, to hand things over to Justice Putnam for him to pick up the ball and run with it from here, and I can, guess what? I can tell you actually what's going to go on over there. Did I finish up on the last of the tweets that I was reading? I don't know. I'll have to just give you a guide to all the rest of what was in Pocket if I don't find any way of getting to it. But I'm sure that some of this will be included in Justice's show coming up next. Let's see. Republicans warn Democrats against investigations and hearings, of course, but Mueller is more likely to finish his job now that Representative Adam Schiff is poised to become chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Wells Fargo knew that an auto insurance plan was overcharging their customers for 4 years before the bank scrapped the program.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
I like the look of the sampling that Justice has for you. China's ties with Taiwan chip firms is under scrutiny as the U.S. trade war heats up, and Monaco police detained the Russian tycoon who paid $100 million over asking price for Trump's Palm Beach property. Dmitry Rybolovlev, remember him? In a far-ranging graft and corruption probe. Next.